Hey, what's up, amigos? It's Chris Lewit here with the Prodigy Maker Show, episode 48. How are you guys? It's good to be back. 48th episode, not bad, over a couple year stint here. I'm chilling in Manchester, Vermont. I'm in the carriage house right now. It's nighttime, so I can't really show you all the cool stuff here, but this is where the players and families stay when they come to visit, and just kind of chilling this week, doing a little coaching, spending a lot of time with the family and kids. It's pandemic homeschool land at the Lewit household, so I got a lot of responsibilities with schooling here, and I got a little break in the family schedule to do a show with you guys, and so I'm excited to get to spend some time with you. We're going to talk some volleys today, but particularly the Spanish volley. Volley's the Spanish way. Could talk about Spanish volley principles and philosophy. I thought that might be interesting. Not a topic that's covered very frequently by commentators, and you don't see many articles written about volleying the Spanish way. You hear a lot about the Spanish ground strokes and their footwork and things like that, their consistency, maybe the big Spanish forehand, all the things I've written about in my book, The Secrets of Spanish Tennis. But the volley doesn't really get much attention. I think there's some myths regarding Spanish tennis and the volley that I hope to maybe clarify the truth regarding some of these myths. One of them is that Spanish players cannot volley. We'll get into that in a moment. And I just wanted to talk about how Spanish coaches and players view the volley and the net game, how they approach it, I guess pun intended, how they approach it, the net, and maybe even get into a little bit of the technique of Toni Nadal or Lluis Bruguera, Pato, Alvarez, some of the legends whom I've studied with. You know, I think the best way to talk about the volley and net game is probably to go through the individual approaches and philosophies of those great coaches who shaped the game in Spain, because it's not a monolithic coaching system in Spain. Sometimes we call it the Spanish method, but it really is fragmented around the country. There is a common vibe and there's a lot of commonalities in their methodology and methods, but of course, depending on the guru and the great coaches there, they're not always the same in the way they approach certain aspects of the game. So I think the way Toni Nadal and Lluis Bruguera and Pato Alvarez, the way they approach building the net game is very different in some respects. So I'd like to talk about some of the differences, and we can also try to touch on some similarities. So if you have any volley questions, if you'd like to talk the volley, particularly in a Spanish context, please shoot me a message. And this show is about junior development and high performance training. I'm trying to do the show now a couple times a month on the pandemics. I'm on the pandemic schedule. Used to be 4 times a month, and my productivity is going down with this pandemic. So I'm sure a lot of you who own their own business or are trying to work during the pandemic, and if you have kids, are probably feeling the same effect, the loss of productivity. So I'm down to 2 times a month, hoping to get to 2 or 3 shows per month, guys. I hope you appreciate that. At least we're maintaining the program and we're not shutting down completely. Like everything seems to be going on lockdown soon. So we're not locked down here. Okay. So the volley in the Spanish context, volleying the Spanish way. Well, I'll tell you one thing. Let's hit that myth that I mentioned, that Spanish players don't volley or they can't volley. The fact of the matter is that most Spanish players have very good volleys. Unless they were trained by a very old school Spanish coach or someone in Spain who teaches sort of the tradition, the very, very traditional way in Spain, they're gonna have good volleys. Now, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, if you said, "Hey, I'm playing a Spanish guy," probably a good chance their volleys are not so good, and you could maybe exploit that and bring them to net and get them out of their comfort zone. But nowadays, in the modern game, the modern Spanish player can volley well, and they usually have a very complete game. So there is definitely an evolution in Spain from traditional to modern, something that I talk about and I write about a lot. The subject of this podcast and this show is a new article that I'm actually working on for New York Tennis Magazine for next, I think it's coming out next month. So I write for them every bi-monthly, and so sometimes I take the contents of something I'm working on in my writing and I bring it to the show. So this is an area where I think there's a lot of, I go into more detail in the article for the magazine, but I'll try to touch on some of the important aspects here. But there is a definite myth that Spanish players can't volley. That is sort of the old way in Spain. And the new way, the more modern way, is typified by players who are complete and players who can transition well. They can rise to the net well, as I like to say. They love the saying rise. You can rise up to the net well. Toni Nadal uses that phraseology a lot. Can rise up to the net well. They can complete the point. They can finish the point well with good volleys. Rafa can do that. All of the Spanish great players can do that. If you think of the top guys now, they all have complete games now. You know, you think of Carreño Busta. You think of who's at the top now. All the best Spanish players who are in the top 100. They are much more complete than they ever were. So that's number one. That Spanish players can volley, and coaches teach the volley, especially nowadays. Now, the one system in Spain that I would say, near and dear to my heart, the Bruguera system, from my old friend and mentor, Lluis Bruguera, is probably the most, I don't want to say volley deficient, but probably spends the least amount of time training the volley. And I think it's probably a deficit in their system. They could spend more time developing that complete game. So that is a knock, a criticism that the Bruguera style, the Bruguera method receives sometimes. It's very heavily ground stroke based, a la the traditional Spanish mode, and they don't do that much volleying. You know, they play doubles on Friday, maybe a little bit in the drills, but most of the emphasis, the spotlight, the main focus is on the bread and butter, baby, the forehand, especially the forehand. Bruguera's system develops a great forehand. And the solid backhand and good movement and baseline work. So that is the crux of the Bruguera style. And of course, many coaches copy that style in Spain because the Bruguera name and the Bruguera family is such a powerful, influential family in Spain. So there are many coaches who still, I think, teach that style. And I would say it's a little more traditional Spanish, in the sense that the volley is not, I don't want to make another pun, but it's like that, the forefront. You know, it's not in the front court. The volley is not front and center. I don't want to say an afterthought, but you guys know what I'm saying. It's possible to go through the Bruguera system and come out the other side after years and not being super comfortable at net. Like, I could totally see that happening to a junior player going through the Bruguera system. I mean, Luis might not like if I say that, but he probably disagree with me. But I think that's as objectively as I can, I would say that's what happens in that style. Now, if you compare that to the system of Pato Alvarez, which is the Sanchez-Casal system, many of you may know the Sanchez-Casal Academy in Spain, which is a pretty well-known academy in Spain, and now around the world, also in China and in the U.S. here. The volley is front and center in that system. So that is a big difference. So when you say, oh, Spanish players can't do this, can't do net, you have to identify what system you're talking about. If you go to Mallorca, you'll talk about Toni Nadal's system, the Nadal Academy. Much more complete game oriented, in my opinion. If you go down to Valencia, Alicante, Juan Carlos Ferrero's system, the system that they use at Equalite, the system that they use in Valencia, you see styles like in Valencia, at Lozano Altour. They may be a little more baseline, folks. Depends on the academy. But my point is, there's these trends, lineages, and if you follow the trend line, if you follow the lineage line generationally, or you look who the guru is, you're going to see coaches who a little more Bruguera style is going to be a little less net, and coaches who are trained in the Sanchez-Casal model. The Sanchez-Casal philosophy, which is the Pato Alvarez, the William Pato Alvarez philosophy. If you follow that trend line, it's going to be a lot more volley proficiency. Depends on the part of your country that you're in. Depends on where the coach trained and who the coach mentored with, understudied with. So, Sanchez-Casal system, very volley-oriented. Emilio Sanchez and Sergio Casal were the number one doubles team in the world. A lot of people don't realize that. That in Spain, they've had a number of tremendous doubles players. You have even now Marc Lopez, Feliciano Lopez, both excellent doubles players. Marcel Granollers is another one. I was looking online to see who's still on tour now and who's in the doubles rankings. Granollers is really good doubles. Lopez, I think, would hit number 3 in the world in doubles. Feliciano Lopez is an unbelievable all-court player, net player. He won the French Open with Marc Lopez in 2016, I believe, in doubles. And Emilio and Sergio were number 1 in the world in doubles. There's a lineage of great doubles players from Spain, which a lot of people don't realize. They just figure the Spanish players, baseliners, grinders. There are a number of really good volleyers from Spain. And I think you see, not coincidentally, some of the best volleyers coming out of the Sanchez-Casal system. Players who can volley really well come from there because that system, that method, a lot of the drills involve the volley. So Pato Alvarez had the philosophy that you'd work on the volley and the transitional shots every day in your buckets, in your baskets. And so that is part of the daily nutrition, the part of the daily bread that you eat at Sanchez-Casal. And I would submit to you guys that that's different than at Bruguera Academy, which is not far down the road in Barcelona, where I don't think you're going to have that same nutrition. You're not going to digest volleys every day within a systematic approach. It's a little more piecemeal, a little more added on at the end of the week, at the end of the day, not as much core of the drilling system, of the coaching philosophy. So I think that's important to make that differentiation. And you may not believe the volley is as important as Sanchez-Casal believes it is. And you may prefer more of a Bruguera approach where, Bruguera, you can spend 90% of your week on building that massive forehand, and you may not need to volley that much except for a Friday doubles match. And maybe that's okay for you. But with that kind of system, that kind of approach, that kind of philosophy, you can imagine after 5 or 6 years or whatever the time frame is, the player at the end of that road is different than a player who's doing volley and transition drills every day as part of their daily nutrition, right? So the system matters in terms of what you get at the end of the rainbow, at the end of the journey, what type of player you output, you produce. Best example I can give you guys that if you look back, if some of you who remember the way Emilio Sanchez played, was a great player reached, I think, 7 in the world. If you compare his style to the style of Sergi Bruguera, another superstar player from the 80s and 90s, both those guys were contemporaries. Bruguera is very much more baseline oriented. He had good volleys, but didn't come in as much, wasn't as much of an all-court player, a complete player. And Emilio Sanchez was, and I think part of that's maybe personality, you could argue, but also part of it is definitely the influence of their coach, Pato Alvarez in the case of Emilio Sanchez, and Lluis Bruguera in the case of Sergi. And the way what type of drills they did every day, what type of exercises, the system that, the methodology that was used on a day-to-day basis with them. So I think that's a clear delineation there. You can kind of try to digest that and use those examples to help you understand some subtle or not so subtle difference between those systems. Even though there are a lot of similarities between those systems, that is one difference between Bruguera and Sanchez Casal and Pato Alvarez. So we could talk about which one has more merit, whether one's right or one's wrong, but I would submit to you guys the more modern approach that's gaining momentum in Spain is definitely more of the complete game, the volley. You see that much more down in Valencia, Alicante area, in Vienna, at Equalite Juan Carlos Ferrero, the big focus on the complete game, You see players from that part of the country coming out a little more complete, a little more clean in the technique, versus a Bruguera type player might have more of the classic Spanish style, a little more grind, a little more heavy maybe more extreme grips are allowed in the Bruguera system, more hanging back in the back of the court to grind more and to play heavy top, heavy RPM, heavy effect, mucho efecto, big spin. And you see players coming from Valencia, Alicante. David Ferrer is another example. David Ferrer Academy, who are a bit cleaner in the technique, more all court, play a little more closer to the baseline, can transition a little better. I'm speaking broadly here, but I think that is a pretty fair characterization of the different styles. You're moving from 2 academies in Barcelona down to Ferrer's academy in Alicante. Ferrer's in Alicante, I believe. Maybe Valencia, Alicante. Ferrer's in Alicante. And Juan Carlos Ferrero, who is also outside of Alicante in Vienna, and Lozano Altur is probably a little more traditional in my view. That he's in Valencia, their academy's in Valencia. These are some of the big name high performance places in Spain. More in Barcelona, you have Sanchez Casal, and you have Bruguera, and you have some others. BTT is another one. Barcelona Total Tennis, definitely more modern, more all-court, more complete game-oriented. I think Bruguera is the one that stands out to me as a little more classic in terms of not as much focus on the volley, much more emphasis on consistency and grinding from the back, even though that is part of all Spanish academies, but it's all about priorities, and emphasis. So by and large, I would say that Bruguera is the most classic in Spain, focusing on the big forehand, the heavy baseline game. And do they work on transition? Sure. They do some volleys? Sure. But it's not as big a priority as it is even nearby in the Sanchez Casal program. So you have to understand it. If you're thinking about sending a kid to Spain, that might be in some important information. If you have the goal of developing an all-court player, a net player, Bruguera might not be the best style for your kid. Or if you want your kid to be more, to work more on their movement and grinding and defense and big topspin forehand, Bruguera might be perfect for you. Maybe they don't need to do too much volley work. For example, I just sent one of my students down to Sanchez Casal, and I send a lot of kids to Sanchez Casal, and I send a lot of kids to Bruguera. So I send kids everywhere, And he was down there, and I really feel that he needs work on his movement and his footwork and his forehand RPM, and I was, to be honest, and I love Emilio a lot, I was a little disappointed because I sent him down there. He was there 2 weeks, and when he came back, you know what he told me that he worked on and improved the most? His volley. And I said to myself, I said to him too, I said, man, I wish they hadn't worked so much on your volley, because you really need to work on your movement, your inverted forehand, which is the runaround forehand. They call it the invertido, the drive invertido in Spain. You really need to work on that, and your footwork, your balance around the court. And they didn't work that much on that. They spent a lot of time on the volley. And I said to myself, well, that is, maybe I'm not surprised, but that is definitely a big part of the Sanchez program and philosophy and part of the principles there, So I see some good friends tuning in, posting some questions and comments. Hey guys, how are you? It's good to see you back on the show. Glad you could tune in live. I know a lot of you guys are not able to tune in live, and my show times have been bouncing around. I apologize for that. We got to get back to a regular show time. And we used to have a lot of regulars tuning in, I think Saturday night, Sunday night, and I'm sorry guys, we've been bouncing around with the pandemic, and my show times have been all over the map. So I know you guys are enjoying the show on the replays, podcasts and our YouTube channel, but it is always nice. I remember last year we used to have, dozens of people live on the show, and we'd get a nice debate going. So I'm sure when we get the showtimes back to normal, we'll get that feeling again. So Jake Sue says, how do you encourage volleying when a kid is 6 years old and can get lobbed easily? That's a great question. So I'll tell you another story. That's a good segue with my old coach, my old mentor, coach mentor, Lluis Bruguera. And Luis would oftentimes, and I've been witness to it, tell young kids not to go to net very much. He'd say, why you want to go to net? Why he'd tell little kids, to really discourage them. And I'm not sure I liked when he did that, but he said, why you want to go to net? You're so little. It's so easy to lob you. You don't have long arms. He would pose that question to kids. Why do you want to go there? And I felt it was a little bit. It made sense, rationally, but also sometimes we want kids to do things that they're not good at so that they can have these skills for later on down the road, which Luis didn't talk about that much. But his point was, try to make the right strategic move. And for little kids, usually going to net is not a great strategic move because they're little. They're physically small, they don't have a height or reach, and so the net becomes a very dangerous place for them. So I think in general he's trying to make that pitch, that argument with his young players, but at the same time I think it can be detrimental to a young kid to say that too much, because then they don't maybe explore an area that they're going to need later. I'm sure Luis would couch that message as the kids get older. He would frame it a little differently to the kids as they got bigger and stronger. But I also think that some kids they love to go to net even though they're small. They have a passion for the net. And I think it's not the best approach to discourage them from that. So I don't know how you guys feel about it. Kristia says, I remember Emilio saying instead of a volley, do a swinging volley when they are younger. Emilio is really good and smart. Swinging volley is good. I think you want to teach swinging volley to young kids because they often get moonballed. It's a great way to handle a moonball, and it's part of the modern game. You got to have a good topspin volley. But I think, Jake, to answer your question, you want to teach the kid to be smart. So they have to understand that strategically, this may be not a good decision for me to go to net a lot. But at the same time, you might want to say to them, look, you're small. It's going to be a tough play for you to go forward. To rise to the net is maybe not the best strategy for you. Because why? Because let's just do the math. The net is 36 feet wide. We have the singles, but basically you tell them the net is very wide, and your reach is not very wide, and your height is not very good either. Explain that to the kids so they understand that the net is not always a great place to be. Don't lie to them. Don't tell them, go, 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 go. It's going to be good someday. You can say someday, but explain to them why it's not such a great strategy right now. But then maybe explain to them why they might want to do it anyway, so that they develop these skills for later on. But I like to have a very open and frank and clear, honest discussion with my players when they come to net, about coming to net, and so that they understand the entire scope of what they're doing. I don't like to fool them or lie to them and say, oh, the net, you should always go there because it's going to be good for you at the net, because it's not true. And it leads me to another tangent, another segue, where one of the biggest commonalities I see across Spain in terms of the volley and teaching the net game is that the net is not always a good place to be. That's a common philosophy in Spain. I wrote an article about this a while back. Really good article. It's posted on my blog, prodigymaker.com. Prodigy Maker, let's go. A lot of good stuff on prodigymaker.com.